Hello and welcome back. Today is a bit of a blog, so we'll go over a bit about what's happening on the forums, a bit of a conversation about where I'm at with things, what I think about some things, etc. So we'll check out the forum now. Not much has been happening lately. Most of the things have been me talking about the Math64 library or the indexes or the bank's replacement library, that conversation, and then the internal function interface library as well. There's a bunch of live videos for you to go back through and catch up if you want to know about what's happening with those. I'm not logged in at the moment, so I can't see everything on the forum. If you're not logged into the boards, you can't see who posted things and all that kind of stuff. It's actually a privacy thing for members. Right, so first things first, you can see some of the conversations going here. So this is the index ranges conversation, which was in May pretty much. That morphed into trialing a bank's library like that, and then it became obvious that we needed to set up our interface stuff behind that. There are videos on this particular topic, some examples of how this stuff works, and for those who are not familiar, the index ranging stuff is this conversation here. It comes from this problem in PB, or problem if you use indexes in general. So whether we're talking about images, banks, sprites, whatever, who cares what we're talking about? I'll use banks here so I can just run the thing nice and easily. If I go create bank, it wants me to give an index. In other words, what resource do I want to use from within this table? I can pick out any one I want. And upon starting, I think there's about 1,000 blocks that are available to you to use. I could set a size to 5,000 bytes. Get bank status 100. I'll ask it how big the bank is, get the bank size, just for our curiosity here. So if we run that, we get a 1 for the status, and we get 5,000 for the number of bytes. The conversation about this indexing stuff, which we're looking at over here, is concerning about what range of these indexes should we actually support. Initially, you're given the impression you can have 32-bit range. So this can go from index 0, which is actually not available to use. We use 0 as a false. Anything else above 0 is considered to be an allowable index. If the range is too big, we end up with a giant table. That table is a list. This table is just pointing to other structures in the data. Now, the way people use indexes like this is they tend to bank them in blocks of 1,000 or hundreds or whatever. I think things like image indexes are a good example of that. You might load in 30 animation frames from a character. You might store them at frame 100 through to 130. And then for simplicity's sake, rather than store the next animation after that, you might just store the next animation starting at 200 or 300 or 500 or whatever it is. Assuming that none of your animations have more than 100 frames, you've partitioned off this space quite comfortably to use. You don't have to keep an array, keep track of where these things are, that's what I'm saying. But when you do that, you take up a bunch of memory that's not actually being used. So one of the things I want to do with changing how indexes work internally, or just querying the community about, do they use really high indexes? Is it okay if we have a smaller range? Here I'm saying between 1 to 64,000, or to 65,536. 1 to 24-bit range, which is 16 million, or 32-bit, which is a much bigger number than that. You know, it's 4 billion or whatever it is. Possibilities. This is impossible. You can't actually have this many images anyway. You run out of memory well before you run out of indexes. So, and if you have a range that's this size, then you know you're not going to run out of indexes anytime soon. It's much more realistic. But importantly, behind the scenes, the libraries, the command sets can do things about managing their own resources a bit better. They can actually take up less memory. They don't have to hunt through memory to find things as much. There's always little benefits that are part and parcel of these things, which is what this conversation here was all talking about. Going well so far, aren't we? So, back to beginners. That indexing conversation turned into a conversation about I wrote a prototype of the index replacement. I thought I'd better write an actual implementation, so I wrote another version of the Banks library that uses that, and it was speed tested against the existing Banks library, and comes out to be much faster, which is great to know. And probably once deployed, you'll probably find little bits and pieces here where it works a bit differently, and where if you're using dynamic indexes, you'll get indexes within certain ranges that you may not have got in older versions. But the goal is to swap all of the command sets across, clean them up to this new approach, and it should be much more efficient going forward than what it is at the moment. If you have 1,000 sprites and you have to allocate, you need another sprite on top of that has to recreate the whole sprite system to give you that extra sprite. And we don't want that in the future. That's not very performant if you have lots of things going on. It's okay if you run through and pre-create everything, but even that is still problematic, as there's time and energy wasted in that pre-creation process. It's better if we can just do it at runtime and try and do it as cleanly and consistently as we possibly can. So yeah, the index conversation spawned the Banks replacement situation, and then from that it becomes evident that you need a way of talking between banks, which is what this conversation about interfaces became. This is a picture of that thread actually. So this is the interface thread. This is in a different part of the forum that you can't read as a guest. And I'm not going to log in now for the sake of just doing this. The initial idea was that we want to refer to commands and command sets by name internally, and have PB locate these things internally for us from wherever they're stored, whether it's stored in the runtime, a DLL, who knows where, and just give us the address of that function. So I can just grab this thing, ask it, we'll tell it, hey, find me this function, I need this, and then you can come back and give me the address of it later on. Which is pretty much running in this last example here. There's a video that goes along with this, which is this command set interfaces 3 and dynamic function calling. The latter bit of this talks about actually a secondary benefit of doing our commands this way instead of having the internally bound stuff that we've had in the past, which I've always wanted to get rid of. Is that you can use the call function command, I guess, operation to call a bound function. If you skip ahead to wherever this is, dynamic function calling.
You might have returned integer occasionally. Now here's something that you may not have expected. When we link external functions like that, we can actually use call. I can't do it with this actually. Well, I'm not going to be able to run this because this DLL doesn't exist. But let's pretend. Now I can do something weird with this. I can go call function. I can go create. banks, index, size. So,
alright, now I made a few typos in this little part here. I've got a bracket here and I've said banks instead of create bank. But here we're using the name of the function in your PB code, the string. We're saying to it, find this function at runtime and call it using this mechanism, this call function mechanism. Now, if all of your commands are attached to the runtime in that same way, like your create sprite, new sprite, position sprite, or whatever, you could actually create kind of scripts or solve things within expressions in scripts within your program and call commands directly as you need them, which is another level of flexibility that you just don't have when you have internally bound functions the way we have at the moment. Because you might be aware that if I use call function, if I go back to here, for example, if I have a function, I say hello world, or have this thing here, print hello world. Now, of course, if I just call the function directly, hello world, the compiler will resolve where this thing here, what this is, as a function call, goes, okay, give me the address to this thing, patches the address in, puts a call to this block of code here, runs the internal guts of it, and then returns back to wherever we are here. So if we run this thing, we get hello world back to here. So we can make a call like that, or we can do this, call function hello world, and there's no parameters, so we don't need to do anything after this, and we'll call it twice, the second time. That's really neat because now I don't need to make direct calls to something. And if I have, let's say I have a few functions like this, just to make you call that one hello world 1, 0, hello world 2, 3. We'll make the print statement print out something so we know which one we're calling. Hello world 1 and 2. So if I did this, for loop equals 0 to 2, I could go hello world. Now we need this name has to match exactly. So we need hello world and we need plus the string of the loop. So we add this, and we should call all three functions for us, as we have here. Now, if I try and do this with an internal command, then it breaks because this is an older version of PB. It doesn't have any concept. If I go create bank, I give it bank 200 and size of 5,000 bytes. We should get a runtime error. Yeah, it can't locate this create bank function, even though we know create bank exists. It doesn't search in the internal bound commands, and even if it did, it couldn't call them any like this. They're set out a different way. That's why I don't like the old bound stuff. I mean, it works fine. It works fine for a long time. It was how we did it back in the day, but it's time to move on with those things. Yeah. So my point is that having command sets external from the runtime and declared as linked DLL blocks, or whatever we're going to call them in the future, will mean that we can do things like dynamic function calling. We get a secondary benefit from this other change. That's all I'm saying. Back to here. In the source code board, I posted this the other day. Oh, sorry, there's the how memory works visualizer. You've got examples here. You've got quite a robust example of actually how this thing actually works, which no one's bothered to download. Terrific. I have a picture of it here. So it's showing, the question came in about how memory works and how variables work, how arrays work. I've gone over this stuff before, but so I made a little mock-up of how it works in the runtime. There's a big table, and that table is broken up into, this thing's a variable, this thing's an array. The array, if it's an array, it has secondary data. If it's a typed array, then that array has other secondary data, which I'm hoping is shown here in this table here. So an array, we have our primary data over here. This has its own array data here. And the one below it's a typed array. So we have the same array structure, but these elements here, they have their own data beyond that. Hopefully that was useful to someone. But definitely check this out. It's got a hovering thing in there. We can modify the values and play around with that. If you need to do kind of display within your application, you might get some ideas about how to do that sort of stuff yourself. And it can be really a fantastic way to improve the usability of your own software, is just to have a bit of a scroll wheel and hover thing and let you modify something while the program is running. I'd forgotten about that example. The other one here is this one, which is kind of a byproduct of another thing we're talking about. Sometimes you might need to do case statements, and you can't be bothered to roll every statement out the way it is. So you can use the auto counter feature to create incrementing case statements. That way you're not concerned about what these things actually are, what the index of this thing actually is. You can just slot new ones in wherever you want. Whereas otherwise you have to sort of change the values all the time. It's a very specific use case for that. I think that's all of the bits and pieces that were there. One of the newer bits of code that was published the other day was by Scotty. He's back doing some work with ray casting. Just run this thing. What we're looking at here is we've got the 2D map and the projected map shown over the top of it. So the blue map up here is the tile map, the world. The green is where the camera is, or the observer is. He's casting rays out from this point out here, and we're displaying each ray as a wall fragment here. There's some fault in it, apparently. Oh, there it is. There's some sort of inaccuracy in the routine where it's missing this near edge and passing through the far edge. Don't know, didn't look at it, but apparently Steve's had a look at it and fixed it for him, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, it works pretty well. I always think with these things, you might as well do like Portal kind of thing. Like pre-scan, like rather than store the world as blocks, scan through and work out what zones you're in that are orthogonal, have orthogonal corners. So if you go, well, this tile here and this tile here, they make up one volume. So now I don't have to worry about stepping between this volume and that one. If my camera's inside the volume, I can just go, well, where's the window from here? There's no windows on this size here, so we just do ray intersections against those. And for those directions, we're stopping. And if the ray is leaving through an open edge, now we move to that block. And here you can pre-process this block as being probably would end up with this long chunk here, wouldn't you? I would go through the map and I would add these empty blocks together, make them into bigger blocks. So you're doing less scanning and getting the same result. it's not that much work for it to do, really. Because here, when we're scanning a long distance, when the ray is travelling from the viewer down to here, it's passing through, I don't know how many tiles that is, I have no idea. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 tiles per each ray. It's a fair bit of work to do. So you could probably get, I'm not saying you could get a fixed cost for every ray cast, but you could probably get rays that cost a bit less. So if you're looking down a long corridor with lots of things in a very far distant room, then it's costing you less than what you might expect. That's all. No, I haven't tested it, but probably. Anyway, pretty cool. Like it. In terms of other stuff we want to talk about, we do have a few problems coming up for our websites in particular. The retail problem is becoming an issue. Later this month, we won't be able to use our ordering process anymore. If you're not making enough orders with these companies, they tend to turn off your account, and that's what's happening with us. Probably can, get an extension or whatever, but I mean, honestly, we're in a phase where we're not really pushing sales anyway, and we're in this point where it's this transition, muddy, murky area. And it's hard to sort of say to people, jump on board. Jump on board what, So that's a problem that needs to be solved. Of course, the theme needs to be redone. I mean, I don't know how this replacement site is, but it alone was never meant to be used much at all, actually. With this site stuff here, we do have a bunch of other site things that are problems. We're using an older version of PHP. Now, my web server wants me to use version 8, I think it is. And if I run the sites in version 8, they are problematic. They have lots of errors. And that's really just because we haven't just updated them as going through. And these days, when I'm working from a combination of the laptop and my desktop in my room, it's just not easy. The desktop has no net access, for example, and that's becoming actually problematic, that system. And quite problematic as well, which is the last few times I've booted it, it's actually had, you've had hard drive errors, for example, or it didn't boot, or that kind of great stuff. See, it's a very old system now too. I think that one's 2007 vintage, 2008, so it is quite an old system. For building on and running on, it actually works fine. Of course, I'm going to have to shift all of that, make it external in some way, and that in itself is problematic. The reason I don't do the building on the laptop is that one of the tools I use doesn't work on my laptop. I never bothered to fix it. Now, it's a tool I wrote. It's full of hard-coded garbage, pretty much. It's just the purpose of this tool is it takes various components and sticks them all together to build the final bit of PB. Without it, you actually can't build PB at all. I can build parts of it separately, but I can't link them all together. So I made a shortcut of doing this, and it does this building process where I can build the retail versions of it, the run, the debug. It's got a whole secondary element to it. And when it does work, it works pretty well, but it needs to be updated, and all of this process needs to be updated into a fashion that's more in line with doing this stuff from external devices. So if I can have the current working project be on an external hard drive, and I can just move that between whatever I want around the house or anywhere really, as long as I have the compilers installed in that system, it's going to work fine. Whereas I can't do that at the moment. Everything's so hard-coded to how the old hard drive was set up. It's kind of scary, really. So there's a whole build process that needs to get done. Every time you build something remotely, it's going to be copied across into where it has to be put, and make sure that when we test the next time, it's going to run properly. There's even things like our own linker that has to be updated. Yeah, and none of that stuff is fun. It's not fun having to do a bunch of grunt work that has nothing to do with getting something on screen. It really sort of kills off the mood sometimes. Actually, most of the time, to be honest. So that's a problem I'm going to have to solve in the near future, because it's looking more and more like that older system is getting sick, and it's going to be a matter of time before that system dies for real and we lose stuff. So I figure if I can at least have this running from this system, and have a better way of backing up what we do have. In the past, I wrote a bit of PB code, of course, that copies the current folders and puts them into a backup on another external drive I used to use quite a while ago. You might have heard this story before, but eventually that drive died, and I went away and came back to use it, and it just was dead. It was mostly recovered, I think last year sometime, or early this year. It sat around for a long time, and I think I got most of the files back off it, so it's not lost. But I couldn't do anything with it for a long time. And I'm trying to hopefully avoid that same scenario here. So if I'm using external drives, I want to make sure that I've got local copies on the machine I'm running on, and the external, and I can back up the folder, as in just zip it up somewhere and then upload it to either my own server or whatever. Which I've done a lot in the past, but have stopped doing in recent times, pretty much. So there is a big chasm between what's stored on one computer and what's stored on another computer. Probably should look into doing one of these kind of source repository systems, even if it's just for myself, just to keep things straight. But small work, more hassle. Anyway, this is what's been going on here. I hope you guys have been having a bit of fun, doing something useful, hanging out, doing whatever you do. I guess I'll leave it there, and I'll try and get some of the next problems solved. I don't know when I'm going to get a chance to build the final versions of 165. If I do it from this system, it's going to be after I get the build process working on this computer, on my laptop here. If I do it from the other system, that's probably okay as well, but not without risk. It's not without risk. Which the last beta, whatever that is, that includes runtimes in it, so that's as good as what this would be anyway. If I do a final build, it'll just be renamed not beta and put out there in that state. So however those versions work for you, that's how it's going to work. Of course, there's a section here on the boards about this kind of roadmap discussion stuff here. If you haven't bothered to read this stuff or put your 2 cents into these things, and you probably should at some point. This morphed into the conversation about the visualizer demonstration, but coming back up here, where are we talking about? Well, this is almost a year ago. and that was this roadmap conversation. If you haven't watched the roadmap video, you probably should get out there and watch those things. There's not much more I can say about that stuff. I mean, to be honest, I wasn't quite as blunt as what I probably should have been. My opinions haven't changed much. You know, unless we can get some good time and a good amount of a bit of buffer of capital to put this thing together, because you need to do a lot of stuff. We're not just talking about updating the product. This is one of the traps people fall into. They fall into this. They think, well, hey, if I make my game, I'm going to sell this on whatever infrastructure I'm going to sell it on. I'm going to be rich. Well, that's not how it goes. If you bother to look at any one of these delivery systems, where all of those things have limitations about how people discover content. And in this day and age, the amount of marketing that goes into the free app market is an enormous amount of money. If you've ever wondered why people are running ads on television in markets all around the world for their free app, then you have some insight into how much money they're spending on getting new players to play their game. You're in the same ecosystem as them. You're competing against that pool of money. If you don't have the resources to promote your game, it'll be a new release today, and it'll be probably pushed down the list, in 10 minutes time after 50 other new releases pushed off the front page. That's why the software is one part of it. Your marketing strategy, you're identifying who you're making this thing for. If you're making a game for you, the way you want it to be, etc., for certain kinds of players, then you need to go and find that community and make sure they understand what you're doing. With PB, it's the same problem. There's so many different products out there that do the same basic thing now. It's hard to imagine. You're not going to persuade people with a couple of demos here or there. Hey, come and use our thing. I mean, it's just not going to work. The whole writing software thing and selling it online is a very different proposition. And if you want to really get sucked into this stuff, you're going to have your own ecosystem out there. Your own websites, your own e-commerce solutions, just have a budget to get your software out there and be seen, whether it's just pumping some money into social media or Google search or whatever you want to do. But it's all about money. These things aren't free. I did like the part of Windows 11 announcement recently that talked about making the ecosystem there, or the Windows Store, a bit more liberal in terms of you could bring your own e-commerce solution to their store. So get seen through their store, but not have them take a royalty from you. But let's not worry about that stuff now. It's a ways off, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. Let's just try and make this work the best we possibly can, and let the rest sort itself out. I mean, if you're thinking about making a fortune, making a game, you shouldn't be putting the cart before the horse. Is your game idea actually good? Is it a derivative work of someone else's, or if it's something new or something? I mean, who knows? But maybe you should work out what you're making, who you're making it for, and why they're going to buy it off you. If you can't answer those basic questions, then you've got a problem. I mean, for me, making software is basically a hobby, and it's quite an expensive hobby, but it's pretty much a hobby. So I accept that. Anyway, probably should get stuck into that stuff some other point rather than here. I've got to go anyway. So we'll see you next time. Ponder those things, and we'll try and get through to the next revisions of PB as soon as possible. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.